Hey everyone, welcome to the channel for another Escape from Tarkov video. In this one, I'm going to be taking a look at one of the newest weapons added to Escape from Tarkov, and one that I've been very much looking forward to getting my hands on in-game, the Sig MCX Assault Rifle. The MCX is an assault rifle that is very similar in design and appearance to the MPX submachine gun, which has been in Tarkov for quite some time. Both are made by the company Sig Sauer and are quite well renowned in the real world and have been featured in many other modern games such as Rainbow Six Siege and Call of Duty. While the MCX comes in a variety of calibers in real life, including 5.56 and 7.62 by 39 AK rounds, the version we got in Tarkov to start things off uses the 300 blackout ammunition, a modern fusion of the 5.56 and 7.62 by 51 rounds that was designed specifically for close range stopping power and subsonic use with a suppressor. The ammo has pretty high damage and decent muzzle velocity for mid-range shots, but like the 7.62 AK, it can tend to have a lot of drop at long ranges, and it's best used at close to medium distance. To start this off, I want to just quickly go over the base stats of the MCX and the two ammo types that we get to start off, which should give a decent overall view of its effectiveness, at least on paper. Currently, we have two types of 300 blackout ammo available in the game. The somewhat expensive AP ammo for about $6 a round from Peacekeeper level 3, and the extremely cheap BPZ ammo from Skier level 3, which only costs 90 rubles. Personally, I don't see the BPZ ammo as being really that viable, since it has lower pen than an AP 6.3 round and fairly similar damage. It is phenomenally cheap, however, which means you can mag dump the whole thing without really worrying about the cost at all. In Tarkov terms, the 300 blackout AP ammo kinda sits in the middle between 5.56 M855A1 and 7.62 by 39 BP, with slightly more pen and damage than M855A1 and slightly less damage in pen compared to 7.62 BP. Since the MCX fires at a fairly fast 800 RPM in Tarkov, this means that the rifle with AP rounds should be able to give you a faster time to kill compared to an M4 with 855A1 or an AK with 7.62 BP, since it has very similar stats. With higher damage than 855A1, you need less shots to connect to the thorax for it to be a kill, and with higher fire rate than the AK by a pretty good margin, the slightly lower damage compared to BP is kind of negated by much faster follow-up shots. The two things holding back the ammo on this rifle, in my opinion, are a lack of 100% pen chance against class 5 and higher armor, and the lack of a mid-range round for mag dumping or mixing in with AP ammo to cut the cost. Because it doesn't always pen class 5 on the first hit, you need to rely on keeping shots accurate at center mass against high tier armor. But this is kind of made up for by the high fire rate and damage, meaning armor will get zeroed quickly as long as you're hitting the target. Overall, I think the MCX is a pretty solid option as a high fire rate, high damage, close range weapon. When all your shots connect, players tend to drop very fast as long as you can break their armor or let the recoil carry the shots up to the head. It's not going to have the same ultra reliable armor pen as an M4 or HK with M995 rounds, and the Alton might be the bane of this thing's existence overall. But the high damage means that once you pen the armor, it kills in fewer shots than an M4 or HK, and it absolutely crushes anyone without high tier armor. With that general overview out of the way, let's check out how you should build the MCX for maximum effectiveness. There's actually an interesting decision you need to make in the build process, which I'll talk about pretty quick here. First up, the MCX can be purchased from Skier level 3 for about 94,000 rubles currently, making it fairly expensive for the base build. However, I've seen it as low as 70,000 on the flea market, and that's where I recommend you check. The base model comes with the best stock, a shortened handguard, and the best muzzle brake already installed. Currently, there isn't a ton of different mods for it, though technically it should be able to use some MPX mods that it can't right now, though this may change with a future update. The recoil on the base model is sort of high, and the ergonomics is a fairly average 48 points at base. The first thing I would recommend doing when you build out an MCX is to grab the extended handguard from Skier, which improves the stats slightly and in my opinion looks a lot nicer. The next upgrade I strongly recommend is to swap out the pistol grip for something with higher ergonomics, because the base stats aren't too great, and the pistol grip is the only real place to add high numbers here, since there isn't an upgraded charging handle or a decent option for a high ergonomic stock yet. I like to go with the Graal S grip here, and before anybody comments that the PSG one is better, check the stats because it got nerfed into the ground with the 12.9 patch. Next up, the muzzle device on the MCX actually poses sort of an interesting dilemma, as I mentioned earlier. The rifle comes with the T-lock adapter and the SIG ported muzzle brake, which is a pretty good compensator all by itself. You can then add the Sig SRD762 suppressor to the build with or without the muzzle brake attached, and it actually makes a pretty big difference in how the rifle performs. On the one hand, with the muzzle brake and suppressor, you have the lowest recoil possible on the MCX, which is pretty nice because of the high fire rate. On the other hand, however, with the muzzle brake installed alongside the suppressor, the MCX actually suffers from some insane muzzle flash problems, even with the suppressor equipped. I'm going to play a few short clips here to show you what I'm talking about, spraying full 60 rounders using both setups, with and without night vision. As you can see, with the muzzle brake installed, the recoil might be lower, but it's actually kind of hard to keep track of your sight picture with all the smoke and muzzle flash. Personally, I think it's worth it to use the muzzle brake for close range run and gun builds, but if you plan on putting a scope on and using it for mid-range fights or with night vision, I would personally take the higher recoil and the better sight picture while you're shooting. With the muzzle brake, I was getting about 18 points lower recoil on average, which is pretty significant, so that's a choice that's up to you to make depending on how much the muzzle flash bothers you. Next up on the build, you need key mod rails for the handguard to install attachments. For the grip choice on the MCX, I personally think you should lean into more ergonomics heavy grips such as the RVG or the Fortis Shift grip. That being said, if you want to maximize recoil without sacrificing ergonomics, I would say the Hera Arm CQR grip is a really solid choice, giving you a good balance of both recoil and ergo. The RK1 grip is also not a bad choice, but you'll have lower overall ergonomics. For the tactical device, as always, I stick with the X400 flashlight, but you can add whatever you prefer here instead. For the sight, I would say it's largely up to personal preference, but I wouldn't recommend using a huge scope like a Voodoo or Valde since it won't work great at sniping range. I have mostly used the EOTech hollow sights for close range or the Hammer scope for mid range since it has somewhat mild zoom. Next up, the only things really left to add are some MBUS iron sights or something similar to gain a bit of ergonomics. I couldn't find any other charging handles or gas blocks for more ergonomics, but I could be missing something, so please let me know down below if you found something that I missed. When you put it all together, the overall stats depend on your choices of grip and whether you decide to keep the muzzle brake or take it off. For this video, I'll show a few different outcomes, but the biggest decision is over the muzzle brake. If you run the MCX with the brake and the Hera Arm CQR grip for the best balance of recoil and ergo, you end up with 58 recoil and about 55 or so ergonomics depending on your magazines. This is what I would say is the most practical recoil focused build, but the RK1 could also work here for slightly less money. With the same build but no muzzle brake, you've got 76 recoil and around the same 55 ergonomics total. A bit higher on the recoil side of things, but without the crazy muzzle flash. With a different grip like the Magpul RVG or the Fortis Shift foregrip, you end up with 60 recoil with the muzzle brake or 78 without the muzzle brake, and around 60 ergonomics at the highest with the Shift grip. The Hera grip is probably the best overall option, but the stats are quite similar either way, and the CQR grip is pretty expensive, so I think it's fine to use a cheaper foregrip. In terms of the overall cost of building this thing, you're looking at between 180 to 200,000 rubles for a fully kitted setup with all the attachments. I used the 94,000 ruble trader price for this though, so it can vary depending on what you choose for the grips and for the sight, and the price of the rifle on the market at any given time. Well, that about covers it for my first dive into modding the MCX. Hopefully this gives you a good overview on what the rifle can do and the options you have for setting one of these things up yourself. Personally, I've really enjoyed using it so far, especially in close range fights on interchange and when you're rushing the shoreline resort. It's kind of like the Val or VSS when you push the corner and slam these high damage rounds into someone at 800 RPM, though it trades some damage and pen for much better velocity to make mid-range shots possible. I'd be interested to know what you think of the MCX, so put it down in the comments, and again, please let me know if I missed any key mods for this thing. Thanks for checking out the video. I've got links to my Twitch stream, Discord server, and Patreon page down below for anyone interested. And until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.